Welcome to Third Eyesight. I'm your host, Juan Francisco, and I'm a spiritual intuitive who practices tarot card reading and mediumship. I've always been super curious about the supernatural and paranormal, and I'm here to share my stories and interview folks who want to share their own stories. Let's get to it. Hey everybody, it's so good to be back recording a podcast episode. I was on a 2 to 3 week hiatus, as you probably know by now if you follow me on Instagram or other social media channels, but more Instagram. I was away in Europe. I went to Naples and Florence in Italy, and then I went to London in England, and then Edinburgh in Scotland. This was a pandemic postponed trip. I was going to take this trip in 2020, and then things happened, and so I used the vouchers that I had from the pandemic and used them for this trip. So it was an amazing experience to go visit these places, and the energy in these locations were just incredible, particularly in certain spots in London, but in Florence, I felt some of it. In Naples, I felt something pretty strong in a certain location. And then in Edinburgh, don't get me started in Edinburgh. Also, I want to apologize. I have my AC on. It is really hot here in New York City, so I have it on in the background. You're going to hear it once in a while. You might be hearing it right now. There's construction happening across from me, I believe. That's the noise you might have heard maybe 30 seconds ago. And I'm just going to say a little hi to Instagram right now. I'm going to go into my Instagram stories, and I'm going to say hello live from recording the podcast. So I'm recording a story as I record my podcast. Hey, Instagram, back to recording. Coming out on July 11th. I'm so interesting. I think I'm the most interesting person in the world doing this, and I'm really not. Anyways, that's the end to that. That being over now, just want to say a little hi to Instagram. I don't know, thought that'd be kind of cute. Whether it's cute or not, you be the judge. I don't know, whatever. So, my trip in Europe, incredible. In Naples, there was one instance where I was in, where was I? I think I was in a catacomb or the basement of a church, and I felt a male spirit in the space. But when these things happen, it's like, okay, is this going to serve anybody anything? I think I was just feeling the soul of someone who lived in that city or who used to frequent that church or that space that I was in. And then in London, when I was at, where was I? I believe it was the Tower of London. I could feel the energies in being in the prisoners' cells and the area where the prisoners were kept, and seeing the graffiti by the prisoners. I got goosebumps because I was seeing history in person. Like the 3 people who conspired to murder Queen Elizabeth I, they were imprisoned there, and some of them, I think all 3 of them or a few of them, graffitied their names onto the walls. You can see it today. Unbelievable. So I definitely got chills from that. As I was reading the history or the different histories on the plaques or on the info cards and seeing like the prisoner graffiti or other things at the Tower of London, it's like history came to the present, and I just felt it all at once. And listen, we could say that's just my mind, putting myself into a state of mind as I'm enjoying history and reading about it and seeing evidence of history in the location that I'm in. We can totally say that. That's completely fair. But for me, I personally feel like that was the feeling of the sensation of feeling the energies of history in the present moment, like feeling the energies of the people, the residual energy from that time. That's how I interpret that feeling, because I tend to feel that majorly when I'm in historic places and I learn about the history of a place. Edinburgh, I posted an Instagram live of myself in Greyfriars Kirkyard, which is the cemetery. A kirk is I believe, the Scottish Gaelic term for a church. And so I was in Greyfriars a couple times when I was in Edinburgh, and the last time I was there, I decided to chill out there and film an Instagram live. And I talked about how peaceful it felt, and that cemetery has a lot of history. It's a history of a concentration camp I believe in the 1600s or 1700s. That persecuted a certain religious group. It's the history of the people who are interred there, the histories of all the different Edinburgh residents who were, I hate to say it, but they were piled up there in that cemetery. What you see in the gravestones doesn't even represent all the interments that are there, because there's so many more people there than you see gravestones. It's pretty mind-boggling. And I just felt so much peace as I was sitting in the lawn of that cemetery, and you could see that in my Instagram live that I posted I believe it was the first week of July. Now I'm back, and I have to admit, I was feeling a little homesick. I missed my bed, I missed my studio apartment, and I did miss recording podcast episodes. I actually did. And I'm not surprised by that. When I use the word actually, what I mean by that is sometimes I do struggle with, well, I have my full-time job, I have this, and I really want to make this a priority. And I do make it a priority because I obviously, as you can tell, I post episodes pretty consistently, and I'm pretty good at it. Maybe there have been a couple times where I've told everybody, like, hey, I just haven't had the energy this week and I've skipped on it. Or it's a holiday, which is very different. But I think sometimes I wonder if I can juggle it all. And then I worry, like, am I ever going to grow tired of doing this podcast? Am I ever going to get to a point where I feel like, is anyone really listening? And I actually received a note from somebody, from a listener, yesterday, and I'm going to share it with you. But before I share it with you, I just been feeling like I've always felt this way. It's the doubt that creeps in, but the consistent feeling I have is just keep doing it because you enjoy it. And I do enjoy it. So it's no surprise to me that I, quote unquote, actually enjoy doing this podcast. In the moments where I feel like, is anyone listening? I put this work into it. And I sometimes I stress myself out to record episodes, and I really shouldn't do that. And I ask myself when I'm in my doubting moments, like, is this going anywhere for me? Is this really helping people? Is it bringing people into conversations they otherwise wouldn't be brought into, And during the last part of my trip, I just felt like I was missing this so much. And I was reminded of how little all that really matters. What matters is that I enjoy what I put out there. And it sparks my joy, as Marie Kondo would put it. And I'm very grateful to those of you who listen to this podcast. And no, I don't need validation from people to continue this podcast because I know I'm enjoying it. If a year from now, this podcast has the same exact type of reach that it does right now, I would love to have further reach. I really, really would. I really would. I would be disappointed if that weren't the case. But at the same time, I've been doing this for the last 6 months, 7 months. I enjoy it so much. Why would I let go of it, right? And I feel like that's normal with projects that occur on an ongoing basis. Like, you kind of wonder, should I still keep doing this? Should I not? And let me tell you, 98% of me, when I have my doubting moment, it's like 98% of me believes that I got to keep doing this because I want to keep doing this. That 2% is a little voice like, but do people really listen? Do they really care? Like, I don't really care. I do. Yes, I do want people to listen. I want people to feel comfortable with this topic of the supernatural and spirit and the paranormal. But hey, if I lost all my listeners tomorrow, I'd be bummed. Maybe I would take a little break to deal with it because I'd be sad about it. But I enjoy it so much. And there's always at least one person out there who feels that they can connect with something you will put out there, you, the listener. It's not just restricted to a podcaster like me, or an artist with a canvas, or a singer releasing a new album. Like, there's at least one person out there whose mindset you can impact, or whose life experience you can have an amazing effect on. And that brings me to an email that I received yesterday. This is from Lauren in Australia. She wrote, "Hi Juan, I just wanted to pop in and say I'm really enjoying your podcast all the way over in Australia. Your journey, although different, has a similar timeline to mine, so it has been great to follow along with you. Thanks for all the insight you provide and for being so open and sharing your experiences. And she also noted that she heard about me through another podcast. Lauren, thank you so much for your note. I so appreciate it. And from Australia, oh my goodness, like I'm here in New York City in the United States, and I have a listener in Australia who feels this way. I can't tell you how much, Lauren, that means the world to me. I don't take that for granted one little bit, not at all. I feel like the luckiest person in the world when I see an email like that. And I have to say, you're not the first Australian who has told me they listened to my podcast or who learned about me through another podcast. So shout out to all those folks in Australia. Shout out to you, Lauren. Thank you so much for your support. And as always, send me any questions you have that you'd like me to answer on the podcast. Share feedback with me if there are things that you want to see me continue, things you want me to see, things that you want me to see. Oh my goodness, I can't speak. Things you want to see me change. Maybe my language and my my sentence formations. That's one start, right? So I'm always an open line of communication. You can submit an email to me, as Lauren did, through my contact form on my website, thirdeyesight.media. You can DM me on Instagram. And that leads me to the question that inspired this podcast. So I put out a query on Instagram asking folks to submit their questions for me to answer on the podcast. And here is David in Miami, my hometown. So David says, how to differentiate between your own thoughts and the just knowing of the universe. An age-old question, an age-old wonder. So I'm going to start by referencing really briefly Catherine Allen's first book. And I recently interviewed Catherine Allen on the podcast, and her first book is called A Little Bit of Intuition. Wonderful book. I highly recommend it, not just because I interviewed her. It really is a wonderful primer for how to get in touch with your own intuitive side and know the difference between your own thoughts, your own very human thoughts, and the intuition of your inner soul being. And so Catherine puts it really, really perfectly. I'm going to paraphrase this, that when you have a thought, when you want to have insight about something and you have a thought in response to that desire for insight, and when you have that thought and you feel fear or anxiety, that's a very good indication that that is your human mind trying to protect you in a way that really isn't warranted. So when you feel fear or anxiety regarding a decision to make or a thought that crosses your mind, it's a good sign that that's not the path you should go on. That's not the thing that will, I'm going to use the phrase again, I'm sorry, that's going to spark your joy. So David, and all of you listening, when I have made some decisions, yes, I've made some decisions out of pure fear, 100%. That's being human. And I've learned that sometimes that has led me down a path that I felt wasn't the best for me. I could have done the other route of things and maybe would have been a little happier. At other times, making a decision out of fear has led me towards a path that was just fine. And perhaps once I'm in that just fine-ness of that decision, I start to consider, well, if I would have made that other decision, I would have been even more fine. I would have felt even better. So it's not as easy as, it's not a black and white topic. It's not as easy as there are some decisions you will make that will make you go down a bad path, whatever bad means. Some decisions that will make you go down a good path, whatever good means. Good and bad are very judgmental ways of looking at the decisions a human being can make for themselves, for their own life. And so, first and foremost, I want to say when we make decisions, if they involve other people, we of course have to consider the well-being and the spiritual growth of the other person involved. Sometimes, of course, we feel like we have to make decisions that will disappoint other people or that we feel will inconvenience other people. But as long as you know that your intention is to be authentic to yourself, not harm yourself, not harm other people emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually, you make the decision you need to make. I use this phrase, if it don't pay my bills, I shouldn't pay any mind. Now, that's it's a little bit of a cutthroat way to look at things, but it's like if a decision that I make will not affect someone else's livelihood, well-being, and happiness, then I shouldn't worry about what other people think about my decision. If other people want to make a decision for themselves and it will restrict my rights, my ability to live as freely as I'd like to, my ability to be as authentic with myself and other people as I'd like to be, that's an indication that maybe that decision they want to make that will impact my life isn't a very healthy decision. So I want to be really clear that when I talk about deciding whether the thought you have is your own mental human thought or an insight from the universe, we have to be really clear about how that can take place within different circumstances, whether it's you making a decision purely for yourself that doesn't affect anybody else, but in reality it does because, everything is a domino effect. But that's another topic for another day. But I just want to make that very clear that as you continue your journey as a spiritual person, having a human experience, that it's always very helpful to be mindful of how your decisions will impact other people, but not to the point where you worry what people are going to think about your decision, okay? So I just said deciding between whether your thoughts are your human, like a human side of you or the universe, this is where I'm going to make it a little bit more complicated. We are not separate from the universe. So in reality, there is no difference between the insights we receive or we feel inspired to share with others and the insights that the universe may give to us or to other people that we're talking to. So, I'm going to put it this way. Again, we are souls, we are spiritual beings, spiritual people having human experiences. Our inner soul being is connected seamlessly in a streamlined way to the universe and universal knowledge and the universal source and being. We're not separate from it. And we're also not separate from each other. What separates us is the decision we've made as a universe to manifest ourselves into physical beings that have sight, smell, touch, etc. The five senses. But the true essence of us is the essence of us that is the combination of all these senses in the physical, plus the sixth sense. That's how I see it. That's my opinion. A lot of folks would agree with me. And there are a lot of other podcasts that talk about this too, how to differentiate between your thoughts and the universal knowledge and insight. And there are other podcasts that have said, that I've listened to, that have said there really is no separation between each other and also us from the universe. And it's really us deciding to manifest in the physical as soul beings that has influenced how separate we feel from the universe. That was a whole lot of stuff I just said. So, when it comes to understanding whether your thought or insight that you are having or receiving is from your anxious human mind, the monkey mind as some people call it, or from universal source of knowledge, you have to consider, the insight that's going to help me feel the most authentic about myself and the way I live, and the happiest and the least fearful and anxious is really coming from my inner source being, from my inner soul. And that inner soul is connected to the universe. So we are not something like, and I think me growing up Catholic, I had this idea, and I don't know if all Catholics really believe this, but all Catholic children are raised to believe this, but I saw God as a separate dude out there in the universe, in the sky, and then it's us over here, you know? And that's not the case. God, source, universe, whatever you want to call it, is not separate from us. It's not something out there that is directing our lives over here. Ooh, this gets really deep, and I'm already like doing figure eights in my mind that are going nowhere, but they are going somewhere. I just my human mind is telling me that my monologue here is going nowhere, but that's really all there is to it. So, David and listeners, it's as simple as when you have a decision that you need to make, and you're stuck between two, three, four, five, six, seven decisions. Choose a decision that has the least fear and anxiety intertwined with it. There's a difference between feeling nervous about a decision that you're excited about and feeling afraid or having fear as you go the route of a decision. And I'm trying to think of a good here's a good example. So, I have been in a few relationships, romantic relationships, and there is no, there are a few relationships I've been in, I'll be very honest, where it was on book, or on paper, pardon me, on paper, use the wrong metaphor. On paper seemed ideal, seemed absolutely perfect. But I wasn't showing up to the relationship the way I probably should have. And I was not being fair to my partner. In the arguments we had, the disagreements, I was expecting validation. It was just not fair. But I stayed with the relationship because I thought, well, I can get better, or this can get better. And looking back, I remember how much anxiety I felt staying in the relationship. And I loved this one person I'm thinking of. I loved him very much. But I've had all this anxiety and fear about staying in the relationship. And again, looking back, I know that a part of me felt that the relationship should have ended before it really ended. And not because he wasn't a bad person. Far from it. Nothing he did was ever really wrong. I just was not at the same emotional maturity level that he was at. He was older, but really age didn't matter as much as the emotional maturity levels that we had. I was at a much lower maturity level than he was at that time. And I knew like that I wasn't really happy. I wasn't really happy in that relationship. But I stayed because I was afraid of what would happen if I left. And I felt bad about rejecting or saying no to something, about me being the one saying that we need to break up. I felt scared about who I would be, what I would be without this relationship. And so it took me adding that much more fuel to the anxiety fire that was in the relationship between me and the other person. It took that for him to then break up with me. And I know full-heartedly that if I had that relationship today, I would probably be the one to break up, to end the relationship, because I would take responsibility today for my actions and for how I'm not showing up and how much I need to grow to really pursue a relationship like that. So that was a really good example for me of an instance where I made a decision out of fear, and that decision was to stay in a relationship because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't have the relationship, instead of being focused on how much I could grow without that relationship. And again, it says nothing at all about the other person. It's about me. As selfish as that may sound, we do have to be very mindful of how we live with ourselves, how we treat ourselves, how we stall or inspire the growth of our soul. And in that instance, I was stalling the growth of my soul, in my opinion. Now listen, I was 24, 25. I mean, that was 5 years ago. It wasn't long ago. I'm trying to think. I think I was 24. But there's a big difference in my maturity between 24 and 30, which is what I am now. Huge difference. And it did take that relationship for me to learn that. So there's nothing regrettable at all about that relationship. And that's where the dichotomies show up. Am I here saying that I should have never entered that relationship? No. I entered it. I knew deep in my soul that I probably should have ended it before it did. But if it weren't for that relationship, I would be a completely different person today. I probably would still be that much more emotionally immature. I probably would still have more to go. I'm still maturing. I haven't made it. Like, I'm not this uber mature emotional person. Listen, that's exactly like how I was saying before. We are, uh, and we have this opportunity. I'm not gonna say a task or challenge. This opportunity to decide whether thought or insight we have is our human monkey mind or the universal knowledge, universal source. And I'm here saying, well, yes, we have that decision to make, or we have that opportunity to clear up whether it's universe or ourselves. At the same time, we're not separate from the universe, so there really is no distinguishing to do. Those two things are happening at the same time, and both are true. And I'm also saying that two things are true in this matter, where I had this relationship. I'm glad I was in it. I'm glad that I pursued that relationship, that I had it, because it taught me things I wouldn't otherwise have learned if I didn't have that relationship. And I could have ended the relationship earlier than it ended, because then I would have been more authentic to myself and also more respectful of the other person's time, commitment, and growth. Maybe his growth too. But at the same time, maybe the fact the relationship lasted longer, how do I know if that didn't contribute to his soul growth as well? Is it for me to figure out? No. All I can do is focus on the current moment, how I feel about the different circumstances that I face, wonderful opportunities that come my way, and then make that decision for each opportunity, each challenge, accordingly based on how I feel. Do I feel fear and anxiety? Do I feel openness? Do I feel nervous but excited, which is a really great indication of something being the right path for you, in my opinion? Do I feel like I want something, but I'm anxious about it in a way that makes me feel afraid? That's another thing. Sometimes we want things, like really desire things, that aren't really going to contribute to our soul growth. And I'm not one to tell you what that may be, situation to situation, because that is such a personal decision to make for yourself. But I've been in circumstances where, well, the relationship is a good example. I wanted this relationship. I liked him so much. We seemed good on paper. I really wanted it. And yet, I had this anxiety about it. Good indication that there was either some talking about or some conversation to have with myself in that circumstance, or that I should have made the decision to just leave the relationship. It's complicated. It's not very cut and dry. It's not black and white. It's not easy to just always know when you're making the perfect decision and when you are getting universal knowledge flooding into that brain of yours, into that body. But this is where I really feel meditation is a really wonderful tool, and prayer and journaling. You can replace those ands with ors. I don't believe there's any rule. I don't think there should be any rule that I should state. Like, you should meditate in order to gain universal knowledge. You should pray every day. You should journal. What works for me is I try to journal at least every other day or every day. I didn't journal today. I woke up very late and I decided to start my day, but I did meditate for 5 to 7 minutes today because I wanted something to help quiet my mind, help me to reset for the new day. And that's what I feel like I need to do to tap into that inner soul being of mine and to kind of grow that. I'm going to call it a soul muscle, a spirit muscle. Grow that spirit muscle, soul muscle, like every meditation, every instance of journaling, every time I walk in nature, every time that I do something that for me resonates as a way for me to connect with my inner soul being. That's like an exercise each time, growing that muscle. And like with a muscle, the more you grow a muscle, the easier it is to lift certain things. You can lift heavier things a little bit more easily the more you exercise something, exercise a muscle. The more you exercise, your ability to tap into your inner soul being, the more seamless it feels, the more streamlined and easier it feels to tap into that inner part of you and the inner knowledge you have from the universe more often, more consistently. I watched a movie this past weekend. I've mentioned before that I like being spooked. I like horror movies. And I went to go see the movie The Black Phone. It was pretty, it was a very interesting movie. I liked it. And that is me trying to describe what exactly the genre of it is outside of being horror. Because it is I don't know if I don't want to spoil it, but skip 30 seconds ahead if you don't want to hear this. It's a ghost story, it's a medium story, it's a psychic story, and it's a murder mystery. Okay, spoiler done. So, in the movie, there's this character who prays to Jesus, and she says just, Jesus, what the fuck? What the fuck? And I feel horrible saying it out loud. But I told my friends afterwards, who I went with friends to go see the movie, I said, that's literally me when I talk to Jesus sometimes. Like, what the hell? What's going on? Like, God, what's up? What's going on? So, if we are trying to get to a point in our life where we have universal knowledge figured out, and therefore our lives figured out, that's not what we're here for. We're not here to figure everything out so things happen perfectly and every decision feels easy and we know exactly the path we're meant to go on all the time. That's not living. Being human, living in human bodies, is not knowing what comes next. Growing out of things that we've been conditioned to believe about ourselves, about other people, about the world, about the universe, about God, about spirituality. This is what being human is. The only time we will ever have everything figured out and be fully connected without any barrier whatsoever to universal knowledge, insight. Oh, let's see here. Okay, I'm going to finish my sentence. The only time that will happen is when we are on the other side, in between lifetimes, or at a point where we're not entering lifetimes anymore. We're fully on the other side. However, this is so complicated in the best way possible. However, we are always in that place of being also. We just have to tap into it. It's just we have the barrier of our human flesh and the physical world around us. When we pass, when we're on the other side, that barrier doesn't even exist. The barrier doesn't exist at all. But it doesn't mean that in this physical world it doesn't mean that we are never connected. We are always connected. It's just about working through the barrier, building that spirit muscle, and really getting to know our fears and anxieties, knowing when they show up, so that when we have a decision to make, we can recognize, that's my fear and anxiety. My fear and anxiety isn't always rooting for me, to succeed or to live life adventurously, to be happy, to be authentic. So I'm not going to listen to my fear and anxiety. I'm going to go with the decision that I know will not feed my fear and my anxiety. Therapy for me has been a wonderful way for me to explore my fears and anxieties. And I think sometimes therapy has been a little vilified or kind of like poo-pooed by some people who are deeply spiritual, both traditional religious folks and also people in the New Age community, that some people believe. I mean, regardless of spiritual belief, some people believe that you don't need a therapist. You can just read the Bible. You can just pray to God. You can just take this drug. You can just X, Y, Z. And I'm not saying that any of those things are things you shouldn't do to help yourself feel better. I'm not one to make that decision for you. But if the universe, God, source, whatever you want to call it, works through everything, why can't the universe work through a therapist. You know? Just like there are good therapists and not so good or helpful therapists, there are some good religious leaders and some not very healthy religious leaders. That's life. That's life. But the source of life, the universe, God, works through anything and everything to help us learn more about ourselves. That's why, for me personally, therapy has been such a huge help because it has helped me really distinguish between my fears and anxieties and the decisions that will help me open up to myself even more. And I grew up with obsessive compulsive disorder, so I know the first thing about fears and anxieties that don't make any sense. I used to count numbers compulsively. I used to check the alarm compulsively of the alarm of the house. And I mean compulsively as in I would count the number of times that I would check the house alarm. It was really severe obsessive compulsive disorder in my teenage years and college years. And it took me going to a really great therapist for me to question, okay, why am I washing my hands that much? What happens if I wash my hands once? What happens? What happens if I touch that doorknob? And this is literally what I struggled with, okay? What happens if I touch that doorknob in the house and I don't wash my hands? And so my therapist would say, try that and see what happens. And then eventually I learned touching that doorknob in the house and not washing my hands did not make me, and yes, it's dramatic, but this is my reality. This is how I felt. It did not make me die. Now, it's a very drastic example of fears and anxieties versus the opposite of that. But that's where therapy helped me. And by me confronting my OCD, that has helped me confront other things in my life. Like if I felt like a doorknob was going to put me in harm's way, as silly as that sounds, or not washing my hands was going to put me in harm's way at that time, and this is pre-COVID, just want to say that. What does that say about other things in my life that I think are going to endanger me, that are going to scare me, that are going to judge me, that are going to put me in a bad spot? Maybe those things aren't so scary after all. Maybe my fear and anxiety is just lying to me. And that's where I say the universe worked in my life through therapy. So that was a lot, as I tend to say, because when talking about matters of the soul, there are a lot of opposites that both occur at the same time, a lot of truths that may seem contradictory, but both occur at the same time. Like I said, that's life. That's life. And I think that's what makes life interesting, and that's what encourages me to tell you that it's so personal. Like there are decisions that I may make in a situation that don't make sense to you and vice versa because our circumstances are different, our experiences are different, our frames of reference are different. And that's why the best person that can determine whether you are following your own light source, insight, and intuition is you. That's what matters the most, is that you are listening to yourself and making sure that as you do that and as you decide, as you make your decisions about certain things, following that gut feeling, following your universal knowledge that comes through your inner source being, that you have the intention of not putting anybody, yourself or anybody else in harm's way, restricting anybody's ability to live their life freely, to make their own decisions. That's the starter kit of living your life authentically and freely yourself. So David, I hope that helped. And if anyone ever has a question they want me to explore in the podcast, please feel free to DM me on Instagram or on Facebook. Send an email through my contact form on my website, thirdeyesight.media. This was such a great topic for me to explore, and this was totally, as per usual, unscripted. So I think it was fun to explore this out loud, or explore it as I talked about it out loud. So David, thank you so much for your question. And I can't wait to record more episodes of y'all. And a little note, I am opening up for readings in August. And you can book a reading with me in August, a tarot card reading or a mediumship reading. Mediumship readings are pay as you wish for now. And let me know if you have any questions. Again, my door is open, emails, DMs, do it all. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day.